retired cop, Navy veteran, businessman, and investor. It's the Captain Flavor Talk Time Show. The captain has entered the room.
Thank you for listening to the Captain Flavor Talk Time Show. We are so excited because guess what? This is episode number 1. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Episode number 1 is going to be about how I got out of the ghetto. Make sure you subscribe and check us out on Facebook. I'm Anthony Rivera, your show host. The Captain Flavor Talk Time Show is going to be about business, life, news, and motivation and controversial topics. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a retired policeman. I'm a Navy veteran, businessman, and investor. So the reason why I decided to launch this show is to help as many people as possible that are looking for guidance. When I first started, I didn't have anybody to ask and to guide me to the right direction. So I'm hoping that listeners will benefit from this and be able to better themselves, their lives, and even, who knows, own a business one day. So before we start, one thing that you have to absorb and think about as we go on with this episode is you want to think big, stay focused, believe in yourself, and be willing to execute. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York in the housing developments. And for those listeners that don't know what a housing development is, they're just tall buildings and a lot of people live in these buildings. So some of these buildings were 16 stories. Some of these buildings were 25 stories. They were pretty tall. And a lot of people were kind of like stuffed in these buildings. So each floor in the building that I lived in had 6 apartments on each floor. And I grew up, it was during the 80s and 90s. And it was the wild, wild west. I mean, there were murders, there were robberies, there were rapes, there were beatdowns, there were gangbangers outside the building, there were drug dealers, there were drug addicts, like, you know, passing out on the floor in the lobby. It was pretty tough living environment, you know, having to be exposed to that every time I would leave my apartment and have to come back in. So, you know, when I would work a job and come back late, it was always the kind of place I always have to look behind my shoulder and just make sure that, you know, I wasn't going to be a victim. It was just something that that even to this day I'm very aware about what's happening around me, and it all because of how I grew up. My first jobs was working in McDonald's. That's right, I worked at McDonald's. I'm sure a lot of people have worked at McDonald's, but I've learned a lot, you know, working at McDonald's. Because while I was working there, I got to know the owner, and, you know, would see him come in, and he would check over the schedules and, you know, check over the employees, and, you know, he would put new rules in place. And I really just admired this guy. Like, you know, he just looked like somebody that, you know, I would want to be, but I just didn't know exactly how I'd be able to do it. So, you know, from watching him day after day, you know, I started to develop a drive to want to develop some type of business, but just didn't know how I was going to make that happen. Living in the situation that I was in, just couldn't even figure out how I was going to get out of that environment, you know, just my living environment itself. But I just knew that that was something that I wanted to do, and, you know, was in a mission to kind of figure out how I was going to make that happen. So after that, I worked in several other jobs, small jobs, learned a lot, and always paid attention to the managers and the supervisors, and was just really just embracing whatever I can learn from them. So one thing that you really need to understand is if you're around a successful person, it's extremely important to embrace what you can learn from them. Never hate them, never not want to listen, because, you know, you might think that they might be better off than you, but, you know, living life is a learning experience. So it's extremely important to absorb as much information as possible to help benefit yourself. So eventually I started to look for a job that would have something to do with business. Even though I had no business experience, I was hoping that would land, a business job. So I looked at the newspaper and I found an article in the classified section that was looking for a business distributor. That would sound pretty cool and important. So I went ahead and I applied, and I went to the interview. And when I got to the interview, there was about 6 other people in a waiting area. It was a very empty office, just a desk and a chair, and that was it. So it was almost like they could be there one day and then gone the next. But I waited my turn, and then eventually, it was my turn, and I was interviewed, and the person behind the desk said, "Oh yeah, you're what we're looking for. So, you're going to start tomorrow." So I said, "Okay, wow, I actually landed a business job." So I went home. I was excited, and I started the next day. So I reported back to the office, and there was no more desk. It was just an open space with a whole lot of cardboard boxes everywhere. I mean, it just looked like a holding facility of packages. Maybe what UPS would look like in back of their warehouse. So I was standing around, and eventually this one guy walked over to me and said, "You're going to be with me." So I paired up with him, and he said, "Okay, well, grab this bag, and now you're going to fill up your bag with all these little boxes." So I started putting all the small packages in there. And then the guy said, "Well, you're going to be with me all day. You're going to follow me. Do everything I'm doing." So, we left the facility, and I had this big bag on my back, and we went to the nearest subway station. So I walked down the subway station, my bag, and so finally the train came, and we got on it, and we just started walking through cart after cart. Like we would go from one section of the train to the next station, and he was selling things out of his bag, and he said, "Well, you gotta sell these things. You gotta sell your stuff out of your bag, and that's how you get paid." So I was just like, wow. I mean, this is not exactly what I was looking for, but he says, you got to hustle, and you got to sell as many of these as possible. So I started asking people on the train if they wanted to buy these little things that were in the box, which is like knickknacks. Some people said yes, some people said no. And I was doing that all day long for about 12 hours. And then I basically learned how to hustle. And I was just like, wow, I mean, this is not exactly what I was looking for, but it's a learning experience. So the next day I reported to the office, to the warehouse. There used to be an office, and it was empty and there was nobody there. And that was it for that job. So it was like it was there one day and then gone the next. It was very weird. I never got paid for it. It was just a weird experience. But it just taught me how to be on my own and just be able to just get out there and hustle to sell things to make money. So after that, I eventually got a job at a Radio Shack. And I was working at Radio Shack as a regular clerk, and then eventually, they decided to train me as an assistant manager, and that was cool. I started to learn some management, how to make a schedule, and I just was working my way up, but wasn't sure exactly if I wanted to do that for a long time, but it was a stepping stone for me. So one day during lunch, I took a break and I left the Radio Shack and I went taking a walk, and I saw a military recruiting place. So I walked in and there was a big Marine guy, and he said, "What are you doing? What are you looking for?" And I said, I just want some information about like what's the process like, and if I were to sign up, would you be able to get me out of here? So in my mind, I just wanted a way to get away from it all. Just didn't know how to do it. I didn't have enough money. My family weren't ready to move. So the recruiter, when he heard me say that, he was like, in back of his mind, he was like, "Oh, this guy is a home run. He'll just sign anywhere and he'll be ready to go." So in my case, I was just wanted to hear the good news, and he told me that he would. So that actually got me really excited. At the time, I wasn't prepared to go into college. I wasn't mentally prepared. I wasn't financially prepared. So the military was a way for me to, one, get out of the environment that I lived at, and two, be able to work towards my ultimate goal was to become a police officer. Then eventually get into business. I just didn't know exactly how I was going to do that. But I knew that the police department is something that I wanted to do. So I joined the military. They picked me up and they brought me over to the processing facility in Staten Island. Went through all the checkups with the doctors, the psychologist, was put in a hotel. And before I knew it, I was on an airplane on my way to Chicago. And it's for real now. I get off the bus and another guy behind me gets off the bus with me, but he decides to pull out a cigarette and smoke a cigarette. And the drill instructor just walks right over to him and says, "Give me that cigarette," smacks it right out of his mouth. And he just turned yellow. And I was pretty concerned about what I signed up for. But I dealt with it, went through it, was getting up 4 a.m., doing a lot of exercise and going to different classes and doing it over and over again. But eventually I graduated from the boot camp and ended up in Virginia, where there I was sent over to a aircraft carrier. So the aircraft carrier that I was on was the USS Enterprise, which has currently been decommissioned. But at the time, it was called the Big E, and it was a great giant ship, mini city. About 3,000 people, worked and lived on the ship. So once I was in the military, I was trying to figure out a way to still be able to work towards a goal of one day, owning a business. But, at the time, I was immature. I wasn't a big saver. I used the ATM machine often, 3-4 times a day, paying those crazy fees. And I knew that, I shouldn't be doing that, but I just thought that it was okay at the time. So it's not okay. So I don't know, everybody out there listening should not do that and pay those crazy fees. But I did when I was 18 years old. That's just what I did. So, we ended up going out to sea and going to different countries. And there was one guy that was attached to the same unit that I was in, and he would just never get off the ship. No matter if you were in Italy or Greece or France, he wouldn't get off the ship. And I asked him one day, I said, "Hey man, well, don't you want to get out and see the Leaning Tower of Pisa? Or go to Florence or just walk around town?" He's like, "No, I'm saving my money." So he would just save his money and not get off the ship. And that really made me think about the amount of money that I was spending. I was just spending a lot of money on bars and trips, rental cars, taxis. It was just a huge expense every time I would go on these cool ports that we would end up in. But that really made me think about how I was spending. And this one guy that wouldn't spend any money, he would just sit in the lounge area and just watch CNBC, see all the different stocks, all the commentators talking about Wall Street. And it just didn't make any sense to me, but I was very interested in what was going on. So I started to do more and more research on it, going to Barnes and Nobles, picking up books, and just learning more about Wall Street and the the first stock that I decided to buy was a financial company, and I just bought it really without looking into the financials or understanding anything about it. I just bought it. And to make a long story short, I ended up losing all my money there. But even still, I saw that there was an opportunity, and I saw that this is a way to be able to get me to the next step, to be able to one day own a business. So you got to think big, stay focused, believe in yourself, and be ready to execute. You can't be afraid to take a risk. So I did lose my money in that particular stock, but it was an experience to see what to learn what the potentials would be in getting involved with stocks. But what I did learn right away is your credit is extremely critical. So for those listeners out there, you really need to be careful, what you're buying and the debt that you're collecting. Because to be able to actually get into a business, you need to have a great credit. So, at 18, I didn't have very much credit, but I ended up buying a car from a dealership that was willing to sell me a car, but he ripped me off. Yep, he sure did. So he took advantage of the fact that I was not experienced in buying a car. I just knew that I wanted a car because I was still very attached to my family, and I still wanted to be able to drive back home and see them. So I was pretty much desperate. And the dealership guy that was working with me knew that. So I ended up buying a Ford Escort with 60,000 miles on it, and ended up buying it for over $10,000. And that's pretty crazy for that type of car. But the deal was that I would be paying that car off throughout my enlistment time of 4 years. So I started paying for it from the moment that I bought it, and then I ended up paying for it all the way through my 4th year in the military, and ended up spending over $18,000 on the car. So yeah, I did get ripped off, but it was the beginning of credit for me. I didn't have any credit. My father co-signed the credit card once for me. Then he thought that he didn't want to continue to do that, so he just stopped. So I was on my own, and this car is what helped me. So then I experienced a family death, and then learned that my family member died with a lot of debt. And it's just something that I told myself that I wouldn't live like that. Luckily, I did meet my fiance, who's a beautiful woman, very smart, and her family were just very smart people. And I learned a lot about just saving money and not wasting money on just fees and not accumulating debt. It was the beginning to where I started to mentally mold myself into being able to get into a business. But I was still very young, and it was still an uphill battle. So I ended up getting out of the military after doing the 4 years, and I ended up going into the police department, which was 2011. So I was in the police academy during 9/11. So while in that job, I ended up signing up for a 457 plan, which is kind of like an IRA or a 401k, that 401k that you get from an employer. But city employees didn't get a 401k. They had a 457 plan. So with the experience from the stocks and Wall Street and CNBC and the guy that I learned from in the military, I right away opened up the plan and I started to contribute as much money as I can in there. So any extra work that I did in the police department that resulted in overtime, often the money would just go there and I would just put it away because I knew that in the end the money would compound into like something that would be usable and benefit me in the long run. So the plan was very easy. It was you had to select what program you wanted, whether if you wanted to be aggressive or moderate or conservative. So it didn't really require a whole lot of stock knowledge. It was just basic. But there was other people that wouldn't sign up for it because they felt that it was a waste of money. They would rather just keep the money in their pocket or in their bank account than do that. And that's a big no-no. It's important to contribute to these plans. So any job that you're doing, for all the listeners out there, like any job, always look to find out what program they have. Well, if it's a 457 or 401k or 403b, you want to make sure that you're signing up for those programs and contribute as much money as you can in these programs. So if once you've started doing that, and if you're able to max out on your contributions, that's even better. So if you're married and you have a spouse that works another job and you kind of live off of that other person's income, you want to put as much money as you can in there. And then once you've maxed out and you can't put any more money, then it's time to open up another program somewhere else, like out of your employer. Like, for example, a IRA. So, for an IRA, you wouldn't be able to withdraw any of the money until you're 65, but it's still a great program and it's still a great investment. You want to open up one of those. So those require a little bit more thought about what program you want, unless you're buying it through an administrator that's going to charge you a fee to deal with it, and it's called a load. So, I'm going to have a separate podcast talking about how to choose those and what's the best route to take when selecting what program. But basically, in a nutshell, you need to look for something that has the least amount of fees so that the majority of the investment, your returns that you get from your investment, is actually going to come back to you and not to an administrator. So luckily, I was putting in a lot of money into this, and then eventually my wife just didn't want to live in New York anymore, and we decided to move, and we found a business where there was a person that was running it that was not happy and was looking to sell it. So we were very lucky, and we was able to finance it. So a lot of the money that I used to finance it came from the program that I had in the police department. So it was a great benefit to put as much money as possible in there. So when I left the police department, I took a lot of this money, out of the program, and then I put it in an IRA. I put it in an IRA that was that had very little load, which means fees. And it was a discount broker where I managed it, and I was the one who decided what stocks to buy. So this was in 2008. So this was during a time that, the market crashed. It was banks going out of business. It was just a crazy time to get into a business because there was just so many people going out of business. But I still took a chance and did that. Even still, and the first year I just, I thought that I made a terrible decision, and I was ready basically to move back. But with support from my wife, we kind of just dealt with it and muscled through that, and ended up, just staying with the business. I was very fortunate to have found a seller to finance us, and I didn't have to go to a financial institution and ask them for a loan, and not having any business experience and just not having a strong income because, of course, I left my job. So this is, I want you guys all to understand that it's important to have a strong financial background. So if you're not financing a business from somebody, which is, in my opinion, the best deal, that means that you're gonna pay them instead of a bank until you own the business, because it's a way to get your foot in the door, and then from there, it'll be much easier to get a loan. But it's still very important to have a strong financial background. So these programs like the IRA, the 403b, 457 plans that you get from your employer counts towards your net worth. So your net worth, on how much you're worth, and your credit is extremely important. Those two things are like critical to be able to do a business. So from early on, you really need to protect you need to protect your credit, grow your credit, get that high credit score, and you want to make sure that you're contributing into these programs, because that, along with great credit, is going to lead to success, and you'll be able to move on from there. So my future episodes are going to discuss how to choose a business, how to choose a franchise business, like how to get started more in detail. So this first episode is really just to give you a background, how it all started for me. So kind of you can use that to benefit yourself, and maybe there's some similarities about your life and how you're trying to get to your ultimate goal. And I hope everyone out there learned a little bit about who I am as a person, and you're gonna be excited about my next episodes. It's gonna be a lot of information. It's gonna benefit. Hopefully, it'll benefit a lot of people. So please find me on Facebook and check out our website. And check it out now.